Oil prices have been so stable for so long that you may have stopped paying attention, but that would be a big mistake, according to our guest, who says there are big changes coming. Helima Croft is Managing Director and Head of Commodity Strategy at RBC. Helima, you're very worried about Venezuela in particular.
No, I mean, we've had this discussion about who would fail first, an oil company or a sovereign producer, and we look like we're really reaching that inflection point in Venezuela. They're facing new looming sanctions from the United States, potentially being banned in terms of being able to place their barrels into the United States. Their economy is collapsing. We have a general strike called for Thursday, and it really looks like this country may really implode as we go into the back half of the year, and the question is, what does that do to Venezuelan oil production?
And obviously a disaster for people in Venezuela.
Yes.
You have the good fortune of not being there. What does it mean for the rest of the world? With respect to oil prices, what does it mean for U.S. oil producers?
I mean, Venezuela currently produces a little under 2 million barrels. It has the world's largest proven reserves. I mean, it is a very important producer. 10% of U.S. imports come from Venezuela. We had a situation in the early 2000s where we had a massive general strike. We lost millions of barrels of Venezuelan production. And are we potentially going to see a return to that type of situation? So are we going to see geopolitical risk and oil disruption come back into the market? And we always said these countries had very limited shock absorbers. And the longer we had this downturn in prices, we were eventually going to have a country fail. And we think we're really reaching that point now with Venezuela.
And so are we going to have big geopolitical ramifications? And if so, what does that mean?
I mean, I think it's very important for, obviously, Venezuela. It's important for the region. What if you get some type of refugee crisis coming out of Venezuela? Is it destabilizing for neighboring countries? But again, I think it's very interesting for the oil market because we've been so complacent. There's this view that with U.S. production, that we can basically weather any geopolitical storm. And so I think that theory is going to get a test in the coming months if we start to see Venezuelan production, which has been trending steadily downward because they can't pay service companies. They can't obtain the diligence that they need to basically dilute their heavier blend to market it. They can't pay their oil company workers on time. But do we go to a situation where we go from losing 200,000 to 300,000 barrels year on year to losing 500,000 or 600,000 barrels of production? I think that'll be a very interesting test for the market.
And if we lose that production, do prices then rise?
I think yes, and I do think we will get an initial rise in prices on that. And then it'll be an interesting question of how fast is the response mechanism? I mean, one thing which is different now than in previous periods is we do have a lot of oil still in storage. I mean, the big issue right now for why we're in a depressed oil price environment is we still have this massive inventory overhang. So that is effectively spare capacity. But again, if you lose significant quantities of Venezuelan production, that will have a price impact.
So take us to the Middle East, the other hotspot geopolitically, visits to Russia.
Right.
What happens there?
Anything but tranquil, the Middle East. I mean, what I think is amazing, it's the changed universe from when I started looking at oil and geopolitics at the CIA in the early 2000s. I mean, if you had a situation where you wake up one morning in June and you have a country like Qatar essentially being subject to a blockade by its powerful neighbors, that would have been a pretty big event in the markets. And the market has largely shrugged off things like Qatar, but it doesn't mean the Middle East is any more tranquil. So the interesting question will maybe there is, do we start to see any type of disruption out of the Middle East because of these tensions that are going on? I mean, these were countries post-Arab Spring that massively ran up their social spending to double down on the bargain with their citizens, where they would trade loyalty for prosperity. Now these governments have had to basically slash benefits to their population, and so it is a new negotiation they're having with their populations. It'll be very interesting to see what is the path in terms of stability in that region.